Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank you all for coming out here tonight to hear from our two mayoral candidates, Michelle Wu and Annissa Essaibi George. Michelle Wu will do an introduction. Upon the ending of that, we will field questions from the audience, after which Annissa George will be present and we will go through the same procedures. Again, thank you all for coming. Candidate Wu, we thank you for making time in your schedule to come and be with us this evening.
Good evening, everyone. I'm so honored and really excited to be with you all here today. Thank you so much for everyone who took the time to put this together and to arrange for all that goes into a candidate forum to make sure that we are engaging in community and having the conversations that can ensure accountability in just a couple days. I am humbled to be a candidate for mayor. I launched this campaign a year and 2 months ago as the first candidate to announce, because for my team and me, this was never about how easy or hard it might be to win a political race, but about this moment in Boston and what we need to do as a city to make Boston a city for everyone, regardless of what the field or what the other candidates might look like. And for me, this has been a continuation of work that I've been doing for 10 years in City Hall now. I started as an intern for Mayor Menino, have now had 8 years on the Boston City Council, fighting to make sure that we are changing what is possible in our city. My family has lived the challenges that so many face and that our policy making really is urgent about. I am the daughter of immigrants. I have 2 kids in the Boston Public Schools, and it's my second round as a BPS mom because I raised my sisters in BPS as well while my mom was struggling with mental illness. So I live in a multi-generational household where the juggling that happens is affected every single day by the policies that we're making in City Hall. So I'm fighting to make sure that we use every bit of power in city government to get City Hall out of City Hall into our communities, to fight for the changes we need, for housing to be affordable, for our schools to be good, for the jobs that we're creating to be connected to our communities, and most of all, to be planning for that future that we can be proud to pass on to our kids and grandkids. So I'm very excited to see everyone tonight. We are 5 days away from Election Day, so thank you for your engagement and your leadership, and most of all, I'm gonna say it over and over again tonight, please make a plan to vote and tell a friend to make a plan to vote.
Thank you. We have a few questions that some wonderful citizens gave us prior to, so we're gonna ask a few of those, and then at which point, if you guys have questions, if you can raise your hand, we'll bring the mic to you and you can ask the question you have. But to make it easier for us, if you could just step up to the front, that way I don't have to run all the way to the back.
Councilor Wu, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Karla Bodden. I'm a member of the Prince Hall Order. And we have some questions as Brother Singleton mentioned. If elected mayor, what is anything, if anything, would you do to improve the Boston public school systems? In addition, what programs, if any, would you bring back to both middle schools and high schools?
I wake up every day thinking about our schools and trying to get my kids out the door to school. The pandemic has made it so hard on our teachers and our young people. So our schools plan comes from hundreds of hours of conversations that I had visiting every single Boston Public High School to see and hear from our teachers, our young people, school nurses, school leaders. There's 4 big pieces to it. 1, we have to close the gap for early education and childcare. We need universal pre-K, and we're gonna get that done for families. This is a racial justice issue, an economic justice issue, and the childcare workforce is a place where we could be seeing so many jobs to women of color, especially immigrant communities, if we're investing and coordinating. 2, we need consistency across the board through a children's cabinet. I would ensure that we are looking at every bit of city services that can help young people and not wait until it's too late for our young people to get help through schools, but wrap around and ensure that our community schools are hubs for everything that families need. I'll give a quick example. When we hear from a family that they have lost their housing, The way that shows up in the Boston Public Schools is we get a request for transportation. And because now the shelter is an hour and a half away, we need to help that student get back from the shelter to school. There's already a cycle of trauma that started once that housing is gone. If we had known that this family was about to lose their housing before hearing about that transportation request, the Office of Housing Stability in City Hall could have helped keep them in their homes, could have helped with rental assistance, could have helped with resources or paid utilities or help with food access and all that. So we need to be wrapping our young people around and know what's happening before it happens, because we have the power to help. 3, our buildings are crumbling in so many of our schools. 125 school buildings, only 30-some have modern ventilation systems in the middle of an airborne pandemic. So we put out a plan called our Green New Deal for Boston Public Schools for healthy, safe, inspiring places to learn. And then last, but in some ways most important of all, vocational education and connecting school to career pipelines through Madison Park, through all of our high schools. This is where we're going to direct our energy with the resources we have right now.
Thank you. What are your plans for public safety? And specifically, what will be some of the determining factors in your choice for a new police commissioner?
We need major, deep reforms to the structures and the cultures and the culture of the Boston Police. We've seen time and again headlines that just scratch the surface of officers that can be shielded from accountability, of situations where we're not serving community members with the services they need when they call for help. And that means that response times then aren't what they should be, because our resources are being used to situations like for mental health, for substance use, for homelessness, where we should be freeing up community policing by responding with a public health lens to those crisis calls. So when it comes to the choice of the next police commissioner, I'm going to launch a transparent, community-engaged national search to make sure we have the right leader who can deliver these reforms. I want accountability and transparency in the complaints and the cases and the backgrounds of who is protecting our public. I want accountability when it comes to how we're spending our dollars and getting the overtime line item under control. And I want to make sure that we are truly meeting our residents where they're at when it comes to those 911 calls. I've been in situations with my mom in the midst of an episode of mental illness where the police were called on her. And I know what it feels like to stand just frozen with terror of what could go wrong in that second when there's someone standing with an armed weapon, when all we needed was help and getting to a hospital and a healthcare situation. So I want to be providing those resources. Mayor Janey's already launched a pilot of this approach, and we're going to build on that and make sure that we have the leadership in place in the police department as the commissioner, but also to fully build out our new Office of Police Accountability and Transparency, the OPAT office, that provides that independent oversight.
Following right in line with that question, many police officers often do doubles and at times triple shifts due to the shortage in police officers, which can in fact result in officers that are working and they are tired from working so many hours, and as we all know, working 8, 16, and more hours can also bring forth some form of irritability. That being said, would you be one to recommend the hiring of more police officers or maintain the status quo because it's cheaper for the city just to do overtime?
So I think you can ask my campaign staff about irritability working long hours at this point in the campaign. I know that, I hear that. And it's not safe for our officers to have to be forced to work so many hours a week. What I know from studying the way that our police department is staffed and the way that they're deployed out to different calls is that so much of what is on our officers' plates are for situations that we should have a public health professional be responding to, which would then free up our officers to be doing community policing and responding to the calls that are for police. And so there are certain positions within the department also that could and should be civilianized to free up resources within our department, administrative positions like taking attendance or signing out details. And so I want to make sure we're using our resources in a way that not only is good for the city budget, but is serving our residents with the responses that they need to.
Thank you. What are your plans to address the opioid crisis resulting in homelessness along the methadone line?
Mm-hmm. What I've learned being in city government for a little while now is that the way that something gets done is someone is in charge of it. And we need leadership and accountability when it comes to the situation at Mass and Cass and all the neighborhoods that are affected by the opiate crisis, homelessness, and mental illness. I will take charge of this situation and ensure that we have a point of accountability. I'm going to hire a cabinet level chief who will report directly to the mayor so that we know what is happening. We're monitoring the situation on the ground every single day. We saw what's possible when the city leans in to do that during the pandemic, right? We had the counts minute by minute of how many beds were free in all of our hospitals, how many ventilators were being used, how many people were being admitted and checked in. Right now, we don't know the count of how many people are on the streets in the area near Mass and Cass. We don't know exactly who's in the tents needing which sorts of services and treatment. And so I want to make sure that we are on the ground and have a leader in there who's going to be coordinating among all levels of government, city, county, state, and federal. We need to get people treatment, not just in one part of the city, but citywide and regionally. And most importantly, we need to get people into shelter, low threshold supportive housing before it gets cold. Every day that goes by and we get closer to winter, this is even more of a life or death situation. And the last thing I'll say on this is that we already saw what works here. We know what works because during the pandemic, organizations like the Pine Street Inn ran a transitional housing program where they took over some vacant hotel rooms. And for every person that was able to get off the street into one of those hotel rooms with treatment, with supports, to get stabilized so that they could get an ID, get healthy, 100% of those residents were able to be placed in stable housing. But to go from living on the streets to stable housing, there's too much happening and too many barriers. So we need to find that transitional housing. It can be in a city-owned building that we retrofit. It can be in vacant hotel rooms that we rent in Boston or in the region. But this is urgent. It's got to happen right away before it gets cold.
Thank you. And just to follow up on the housing theme, as someone who's worked in property management for the past 30 years, the rising cost of housing in the Boston area finds many hopeful homeowners simply working multiple jobs just to pay their high rents and make ends meet, dashing their hopes of homeownership due to their inability to save a substantial down payment. What programs will your administration implement in order to alleviate this burden while increasing affordable homeownership in our community?
We are going to put $200 million of our federal funding to housing stability and homeownership so that our recovery from this pandemic addresses the communities who are hardest hit, Black and brown communities who have been bearing the burden of so many of our disparities around housing, transportation access, even before the pandemic. I'm going to make sure that we are using those dollars to build more affordable housing. We have city buildings, city land that we could be integrating the redevelopment of affordable housing with. We need to speed up our processes so that when affordable housing developments are proposed, they're not bogged down and take years and years to get through. And so that will actually encourage and open the door for developers of color in our neighborhoods to get through those processes, because right now it's too complex and you have to know someone or have the money to pay someone who knows someone to get through. And then we need to ensure that we're boosting homeownership. Mayor Janey has already tripled the amount of down payment assistance that families get when you're trying to buy a home. And so now you get an extra bit of support once you go through a home buying class through the 1+ Boston program. I will continue that and make sure that we are directing those programs to first generation home buyers, Black and brown home buyers in Boston, because this is how we close the racial wealth gap.
Thank you.
Will the 2 a.m. nightclub curfew be extended to accommodate tourism and lost revenue due to COVID? Why or why not? And in addition, if extended to 2 a.m., will this also include communities where people of color have restaurants/bars and nightclubs?
Nightlife is so important for a city's economy, but also for a city's sense of welcoming and inclusion and home. I am a former restaurant owner myself, so I know how much it takes on our restaurant, on our entrepreneurs to run these businesses, but also how big the barriers are and what a difference it makes for communities when there are homegrown businesses that provide a place of safety, of fun, of joy, of jobs too. In all of Boston, we have thousands of liquor licenses, restaurants that can serve alcohol in some way. There are 8 Black-owned restaurants that have liquor licenses in all of Boston, right? And that means that the spaces for our community members to enjoy and unwind and be in community are limited by the systemic racism of the laws and how our licenses are given out to begin with. So I'm going to put funding into a specific fund that was going to seek to triple the number of Black-owned restaurants with sit-down liquor licenses, not just in communities, not just in Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan, but in so many of the vacant spaces that we see across Boston. We should be supporting our Black-owned businesses going into vacancies on Newberry Street, in the Seaport, in all of the neighborhoods where people are visiting Boston and tourists are coming. That should reflect the diversity of our city. And then I would say one other piece to nightlife and restaurants is transportation, right? If the T closes just after midnight or at 12:30, workers can't get home, customers and patrons can't get there, so we really need to continue fighting at least for that bus service to be extended much, much later, and for this shift to arts, culture, entertainment, and restaurants to be a really key part of our recovery. We still have many, many downtown office buildings that are empty because people aren't coming back in person to work. Cities everywhere are dealing with this now. We're gonna be forever zooming into different things and live streaming everything. Cities that are gonna continue growing need to give people a reason to be there in person, a reason why you can't miss out on being in Boston in person, and that is our arts, culture, and restaurants. That's gonna take investment.
Great, thank you. My turn. We're going to turn our attention briefly to the rescue plan, rescue package. Once it's passed, how will it be distributed, and what role will you as a mayor, if you're elected, will play?
So this is a once-in-a-lifetime chance for the city. We have already gotten a little over $500 million for the city of Boston, some $400 million for the Boston Public Schools, and knock on wood, as our federal delegation is fighting for the infrastructure package to go through, there will be even more funding, hopefully, for housing and specific projects too. We got to get this right, and for me, that means not putting 1,000 Band-Aids on different situations to be able to have a press conference or cut a ribbon, but to really focus and say housing stability is going to be the top priority, getting our businesses open to close the racial wealth gap, and investing in the future that we need to see, the school buildings that are in need of renovations, the climate protections that will keep our communities safe and healthy. So I've already done some studying of how the federal funds were distributed in previous cycles, or for example, in the 2008-2009 financial crisis when there was funding available. It's important to have some citywide projects that touch everyone, but also for each neighborhood to see the results of those dollars and to have a process where community members are leading the way and we are seeing and following the lead of residents in every neighborhood deciding where those dollars will go.
Great. I have another question from a constituent. They have noticed that in neighborhoods of color, the bike lanes have barriers, but in other neighborhoods, they just have lane markers. Why is that?
The bike lanes are, Okay, as someone who rides a bike from time to time, it's not even a real bike lane if you feel like there's a little line and that's all on the pavement and that's all that might keep you from being safe or not safe. We need to ensure that there's pathways that connect every neighborhood to where you need to go, on the roads, on public transportation, on bike, on foot. And we actually have been thinking about it backwards in a lot of ways. For a long time, the city was measuring success by how many miles of new bike lanes were created. And so sometimes you'd see something just painted on, but then as soon as you finish going through that bike lane, you're dumped right back out into traffic. It doesn't even go anywhere or connect anywhere. So the goal should be to map out where each community needs to get to downtown or to where the job centers are. What are the pathways on that big picture way that work for the entire neighborhood, not just one stretch at a time? Or, I live in Rosendale, so American Legion has been quite an experience learning to navigate the new lines back and forth and back and forth. Oftentimes residents don't know about what's happening or haven't gotten a chance to weigh in, and so we need a commitment for safety across the board for all road users, drivers, cyclists, pedestrians, people who are on scooters. But that has to be done in a way that looks at entire neighborhoods, not just one little piece at a time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, our mayoral candidate, Michelle Wu, also is going to depart from us at this moment, for she has other obligations. So we want to thank you for coming. I want to thank those who sent in questions. Thank you for giving us those questions. And we'll see what happens Tuesday.
Yeah, thank you,
All right.
everyone. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. At this time, for all you wonderful people online, our next mayoral candidate, Annissa Essaibi George, is now joining us. Good evening. Good evening. And just as we did with candidate Wu, candidate George is going to open up, speaking of her platform and a bio, and then we'll field questions from the audience. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you everyone for being here this evening. My name's Annissa Essaibi George, and I'm grateful to join you this evening to introduce myself and talk about the work that I'm committed to doing as mayor of this city. As mentioned, I'm a city councilor at large representing the whole city and proud to have the opportunity to do so over the last 6 years. Prior to that, I was a high school teacher in Boston and taught for 13 years at East Boston High School. And before that, just sort of a regular everyday Dorchester girl, and grateful that my parents, both immigrants to this country, made Boston their home. As I mentioned, it is an important time when we think about the future of our history. Or the future of our city. We think a lot about this historical moment and the history in which we find ourselves in the midst of. And yes, it's an important time in our city's history, but I would like to argue that it's an even more important time in our city's future when we think about the work that we need to do to make sure that each one of our kids has access to and experiences a high-quality educational experience, that each one of our kids has the opportunity to fully engage in their academic experiences, to engage in athletics, to engage in enrichment, and to engage in a school community that gives them everything that they need and also engages their families. That as a city, we are also working on all of the other components that are important to the future of any city, but Boston in particular. When we think about housing, when we think about public health, when we think about public safety, when we think about just the basic city services, filling potholes, building playgrounds, and repairing sidewalks. And yes, we will eventually get a snowstorm at some point this winter in which we'll need to plow the snow. So the city and the work of running the city and being mayor of the city involves big issues and small issues and things that are seen as not as significant, but almost in many ways more important than ever when we think about those basic city services. So I'm here to have a conversation with all of you, to talk about the work that is ahead, the work that I'm committed to, and the work that I want to do alongside each and every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Our first question for you. What are your plans for public safety, and specifically, what will be some of the determining factors in your choice for a new police commissioner?
It's a great question, because when we think about the responsibility of leading the city, it includes things like schools and housing and public transit and public health. It also includes a real commitment to making sure that we have created a safe city and a just city. And I am committed to that in every one of our neighborhoods, not just in some parts of our city, but every community should be experiencing safety day in and day out. I'm also very much committed to the justice that our city deserves, that our city's residents deserve, and working alongside our city's residents, our community-based organizations, and all of you to ensure that we have and meet the needs of social justice across every one of our neighborhoods and in our city. When I think about the very important task of finding a new commissioner to lead our Boston Police Department, I am prepared to kick that off day one of my administration. And the anticipation is, with Election Day, November 2nd, that there will be a certification of the votes on November 15th, and that I, as mayor, will take over on November 16th. On day one of my administration, we will kick off a community-led effort to select the next police commissioner for the Boston Police Department. That is something that I want to do in partnership with our city's residents, to do in partnership with so many of the organizations that do important work around community and police relationships, and working with those that are invested in community policing in every one of our neighborhoods.
Thank you. There's a part B to that. Many police officers often do doubles, and if not triple shifts, due to the shortage in police officers, which may result in officers being overly tired and or irritable while working. As mayor, would you increase the number of police officers, and or would you simply follow the status quo because it's cheaper to have more overtime?
So first, there's no excuse for irritability. That is not an excusable predicament or a position any individual that works for the city finds themselves in. I do believe that we are short approximately 300 police officers when we think about our police force, and the need for greater involvement and engagement across our city. When I do my work every single day as an at-large city councilor, I hear from residents, I hear from business owners, a desire for a fully engaged community policing effort here in the city of Boston. And that means that our Boston police officers are engaged in building relationship with our city's residents and our small business owners and our community-based organizations. Certainly not engaged in over-policing, but building relationship. It is also important to me, when I think about adding those 300 police officers, that we are looking to fulfill the needs of diversity across the department. The Boston Police Department should be a very direct reflection of the city it serves, the communities it's charged with protecting, and our neighborhoods that it's charged to really do the work in partnership with. We need to make sure that we are right-sized, that we are appropriately spending city dollars, and that we are investing in public safety.
Thank you.
Thank you. If successful in your bid for mayor, what are your plans to address the opioid crisis on Mass and Cass?
No, thank you. Mass and Cass has become a huge topic of discussion over the last couple of months over the course of this race. It has been a big part of my work over the last 6 years, long before it was sexy, long before it was something that the media wanted to pay attention to, and long before anyone who was running for office had an interest in the devastation and the difficulty and the real challenges that individuals at Mass and Cass, at Melnia, Cass Boulevard, and Mass Ave are experiencing and the impacts it has on our neighborhoods, in particular the South End and Roxbury. I want to add, though, we also need to face the crisis that is being experienced in a smaller way, but still in a way, at Andrew Square, at Edward Everett Square, in Upham's Corner, at Nubian Square, at Mattapan Square, and Codman Square, Downtown Crossing, Copley Square. Every part of our city is touched by the opioid crisis. Certainly, the epicenter of that crisis is at Mass and Cass. When I first announced my run for mayor of this great city, I rolled out a public health plan that included an approach to the work at Mass and Cass. Several weeks ago, I rolled out an updated plan, which included the declaration of a public health emergency. When we declare a public health emergency and the geography in which that emergency covers, we are able to respond to that crisis in a very different way. A few days after my announcement, the acting mayor rolled out a similar public health emergency, which I'm grateful for. Imitation is a wonderful form of flattery, and it will make the first day of my administration a little bit smoother. I am committed to responding to the crisis at Mass and Cass, and I will extend that public health emergency through the authority I have as mayor of this city. I will also create a 1-mile radius zone from Mass and Cass so that we can better coordinate and align services both on the public health end as well as the public safety end. There are hundreds of individuals who are in crisis tonight at Mass and Cass who are struggling, dealing with addiction and mental illness and certainly homelessness. There are several hundred women who are being violated, who are being raped, who are being trafficked, who are being prostituted tonight at Mass and Cass, and many may not live to see tomorrow. We have to work with a very certain urgency to respond to the crisis that's being experienced at Mass and Cass. We also need to hold those that are acting criminally responsible for their behaviors. We need a coordinated public health effort to help those that are in distress and struggling with addiction, and those that are victimizing them every single day and every single night. There are greater details on my website around that response, and that is in much greater detail. Thank you.
Thank you. Continuing the housing theme, the rising cost of housing in Boston area finds many hopeful homeowners simply working multiple jobs in order to pay high rents and make ends meet, dashing their hopes of homeownership due to their inability to save substantial down payment. What programs will your administration implement in order to alleviate these burdens while increasing affordable homeownership in our community?
Thank you for the housing question. Housing is something that I've heard about for a long time across our city, and we've worked as a city council, as a body, to alleviate the stressors that housing and housing costs have put on our city's residents, and we've seen the impacts of the ever-rising costs of housing on our city's residents, in particular, our communities of color. We see the gentrification, we see the displacement. We need to, as a city, build more affordable housing. We need to, as a city, make sure that we're also building the type of housing our city's residents need, from single people and young people to families to older residents to our seniors to and including our returning citizens from incarceration. We've got a great deal of work to do to meet those needs. We also need to make sure that we are creating more opportunities for home ownership. I'm grateful as I came in before it was my turn to address all of you this evening that Councillor Wu is now referencing first generation or first in your family home buying opportunities. It has been central to my plan that I rolled out earlier this year, that we are not just focused, and my administration will not just be focused on creating opportunities for first-time home buyers, but we will also be very much focused on first in your family or first-generational home buying. We will, under my administration, increase down payment assistance because so many of our families, and in particular our first-in-your-family or first-generation home buyers, often lack the resources for that down payment assistance. We as a city need to do better. And when I think about the $200 million, I know that Michelle referenced, that both of us have committed to through some of the work we've done with the GBIO around housing stability. We know that down payment assistance and supports is critically important to affect housing stability across our city. I'm certainly committed to it. We've got a lot of work to do, especially around not just the ownership piece and creating greater opportunities for affordable rental across our city, but technical assistance around home ownership. So helping that buyer become that first-time home buyer, but then also wrapping them around with services for the long time, especially first in your family.
Thank you very much. Turning our focus briefly to education. If successful in your bid for mayor, what, if anything, would you do to improve the Boston public school systems? In addition, what programs, if any, would you bring back to both middle and high school?
I love that question, especially as a former classroom teacher. We could spend 4 hours talking about the work that I'll do and the work that I'll do early in my term. Because of this interim administration and sort of the unique circumstances around this election, when I take over as mayor of the city on November 16th, we will get right to work on our schools. Because of our budgeting process, the schools' budgets will basically be done by the first week of January, so we need to work quickly. I have committed in my first 100 days, but it will be sooner than that because of the budgeting process, to rolling out a strategic plan around Madison Park Vocational Technical High School. I'm a proud graduate of Boston Tech, now the O'Brien, go Tech Tigers. And those experiences, the experiences I had in my classroom, both from a sort of a more traditional academic perspective and a technical perspective, sheet metal, drafting, and architecture, and electronics, and computer science, sort of the old school computer science, all of that made me a more well-rounded student. Madison Park needs to be that and so much more. We've seen some, but still only a few successes as it relates to the construction trades and the connection between Madison and the workforce. We need to make sure that we are doing the same with a nationally recognized culinary arts program. We need to also invest in other opportunities, financial services, the healthcare industry, green jobs, as we work towards climate action here in the city and certainly beyond that. The new economy will be a green economy, and our young people, our families, our adults, I would like Madison to be a 16-hour-a-day campus. Kids during the day, young people at night, deserve an opportunity to be a part of that growth, be a part of that new economy. And then life sciences and biotech. Boston is going to become the epicenter for life sciences and biotech, and those opportunities are coming. The one hesitation is opportunity to access talent and access a workforce. Madison is the answer to that. There should be an end of the conversation of school to prison pipeline, and that pipeline goes directly through sub-separate special education classrooms that disproportionately impact Black and brown boys. I will end that. It should be a school to career pipeline, a school to workforce pipeline, a school to wealth pipeline. And I believe that goes directly through Madison Park. And then we can talk about building programs after that. Also, as it relates to education, we have to answer the question in that $1.3 billion budget that we spend on our schools, how much of every single dollar is being spent directly on our kids? When we center our children, our students, to that spending, we make better decisions. It's how I got involved in the work around ending family homelessness, especially as it relates to our students in the Boston Public Schools experiencing homelessness, 5,000 of them, almost 10% of our student population. It is how I've directed funding directly to our schools in response to that crisis. Also how I've ensured that every school has a full-time nurse, every school has a social and emotional clinician, a social worker, a licensed social worker now in every school, because I knew, based on my own personal experiences, my 13 years in the classroom, being a BPS parent and being chair of the Council's Committee on Education, how desperate a need our kids have as it relates to mental health, and then layer on a COVID pandemic and a year out of the classroom and away from family and real loss and real trauma, real isolation, what that can do to children and young people. We need those services in our schools. It's also, part of the work that I want to do as it relates to education, and quickly. We don't have time to wait. We don't have time to sort of plan for the long term. This is immediate. We need to look at special education services. I mentioned sub-separate special ed classrooms, but our special ed department as a whole is not responding to the needs of our kids, is not putting our kids center to our decisions. Families need to fight too hard to get services for the kids, for their kids, and that delay creates more damage. And early literacy across the board. When we think about what's happening in our kindergarten, first, second, third grade classrooms, when we invest in early literacy, when we commit to a curriculum that is meaningful, that is rigorous, that teachers are supported in delivering across all of our schools, we create opportunities for our kids to not just learn in those early years, but to engage in content for the rest of not just their academic experience, but into adulthood and the rest of their lives. It's also an opportunity for early screening to identify students who do have learning disabilities, who maybe need extra and additional supports in our schools.
Great,
Thank you. We actually have a small little follow-up on the education question.
I missed something?
No. Well, you got viewers texting us, so.
Oh, there we go.
So the question is, it is very important that our school system in regards to teachers as well as faculty are a direct reflection of the population they serve. What will you do to increase the amount, one, of black male teachers as well as black male principals? And what, two, will you do to increase overall the number of black and brown teachers and principals within the city of Boston?
Yeah, no, we certainly lack a tremendous amount of diversity as it relates to our schools. And we see that certainly in our schools, and I'm going to answer the question specific to our schools, but across all city departments. We talked a little bit about it around policing, but certainly as the city, as the leader of this city, all of our city departments, including my cabinet, should be reflective of this city. We've got a tremendous, wonderful diversity in this city, both racially, ethnically, linguistically, and we need to embrace that, celebrate that, and make sure that it is part of our leadership. And that certainly involves our schools. There should be a direct relationship between the kids in the classroom and those that are teaching our kids. And that is around recruitment and making sure that we are recruiting young people, not kids anymore, but recruiting young people of color to come to our classrooms to teach, that we are promoting and providing our young kids who are in our classrooms today. So think about our high school students today, that we are encouraging them to explore careers in education and in teaching, and then work with them during those years in college so that they return to our schools and to our classrooms. And in particular with our male educators of color, that we are supporting them while they are teaching in our schools, while they are leading our schools either in an administrative role or in a school leadership role. That effort around support and retention is critical. And that during, I came from, earlier this evening, I was at a conversation around Black in Boston. And one of the topics that had come up a number of times throughout that conversation and many others is that there isn't enough of a celebration of Black Boston in particular here in this city. When we talk about being an inclusive city, we need to create those opportunities to celebrate our diversity and celebrate the Blackness of Boston. We have to do that in our school communities as well. Many of our educators of color don't feel supported by the school district, don't feel that there is a space for them. And it has to be more than a book club on racism. It has to be more than a periodic social networking, whatever. It has to be real, it has to be meaningful, and it has to be embedded in what we do every single day in our schools and in our school communities. It's about what happens in our classrooms, it's about what happens in our school buildings, what happens as it extends to our school communities, and then through our district.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor, earlier you spoke about funding. Could you tell us, as mayor, the rescue plan, once the rescue plan is passed, what would you do in terms of distribution, and what would your role be as mayor?
Federal money, COVID. Yeah, so when we think about the several buckets of federal money that we're getting in, both some directly to our school system through the ESSER funds, the ARPA funds that are coming directly to the city, we also have some additional funds coming from the state, and then eventually the infrastructure dollars coming from the federal government. First, overall, I have a commitment to making sure that those dollars are spent in a sustainable way. It has to last and impact people's lives, because although it is massive, it is a massive amount of money, it dries up quickly. You think about when you play the numbers on one of those special nights and you start doing the math, it disappears quickly. So sustainability and true long-term investment is what is critical to me. And when I think about our communities that have been left out of opportunities, we've got a special opportunity to focus on those communities specifically. We've come up over a period of the last 8 months, building on the last six years, an equity, inclusion, and justice plan. And through that plan, we have set out some long-term, some midterm, long-term goals, as well as some measurable items that we're looking towards to measure our success. And we can lay out we can set high overarching goals, we can lay out a lovely looking plan, but if we don't put the dollars behind it, it won't happen. And this is the statement, A budget is a value statement. And so through that work, I have committed $100 million from our federal funds to our Black community specifically. And that money will be spent in a way that the community decides. When I bring together residents, community-based organizations, small business owners, faith-based leaders to the table to talk about how we're going to divide up that money so that it is invested appropriately and sustainably in a meaningful, impactful way in our community. Now, I anticipate that a lot of those dollars will be spent on economic development, small business supports in the Black community, as well as some housing opportunities. I think that's real important when we think about our communities, as well as investing in some of our community-based organizations that have been doing tremendous work. The city should never recreate the wheel when we think about the work that needs to happen for our neighborhoods. It should invest in the programs that are doing good things, and I really believe in that. But I do want the working group. In this working group, we will start that formation. Again, I'm gonna have a busy day one on day one of my administration, because I don't wanna hold on to those dollars any longer than I need to. I want to get to the work of investing, not spending, but investing those dollars in community. In addition to that, I've made a $50 million commitment specific to communities, to entrepreneurs of color. So when we think about our Black community, our Latinx community, our AAPI community, those dollars right into our small businesses. When we think about creating opportunities for families, for communities, for our city, when we invest in our entrepreneurs, when we invest in small businesses, especially after this very difficult 20 months, we invest in community. That is to me, a sustainable investment. So that initial $100 million specific to the Black community will have its own sort of loose parameters from me as mayor, but work that the community will bring to the table on that. The additional $50 million, entrepreneurs of color, our small businesses across our city, creating some real investments in economic opportunities. The infrastructure dollars, make sure I get all my buckets here. The infrastructure dollars that are coming down, I'm hopeful by the end of this calendar year, my administration will focus on two main buckets, because I do think when we sprinkle things too loosely across lots of different categories, they aren't deep, they aren't impactful. So the two main categories on the infrastructure dollars for me, the Long Island Bridge, long-term recovery, looking at the ferry services. I am committed to rebuilding that Long Island Bridge and making sure that that campus is a long-term recovery campus, not a night shelter where we hide people. It is a place where people will find wellness. And then the other piece is our Boston Public Schools. We're in the midst of a $1 billion facilities plan right now that is only touching about 10 schools. That is a small sliver of what we have as it relates to our school buildings, and does not meet the needs of almost all of our kids when we think about this small slice. We've got so much more to do as it relates to our school facilities. So looking at those infrastructure dollars and how we can invest them in our school buildings. And a lot of the school buildings and the facilities conversation has been around our schools that are pre-World War II. It's actually our newer buildings that are in greater states of disrepair. We've got ESSER funding, that first initial schools bucket, that is helpful with some of the HVAC, the air quality, and some of the fixes we need around COVID. This infrastructure bucket is long-term investments, significant renovations, and making sure that our kids truly are in 21st century learning environments.
Thank you. Will the 2 a.m. nightclub curfew be extended to accommodate tourism and lost revenue due to COVID? And in addition to that, if so, would Black-owned restaurants that are in the inner city that usually never benefit from anything like that be helped as well?
Yeah, I'd love to have a conversation about 4 a.m. licenses. That's off the record. Yeah, the answer is yes. I mean, we need to look at creating a little bit more fun in this city. And we also need to see how those licenses play a role in that. And some restaurateurs and bar owners have mixed feelings about that. Nobody has to do it, for sure. But we have to make sure, especially as it relates to entertainment, as it relates to the arts, as it relates to culture, as it relates to restaurants, especially those affiliated with liquor licenses and entertainment licenses, that those opportunities are not just equitably rolled out, and accessible, but that we as a city, and we've rolled out through our economic development plan, you'll see it in length on my website, this concept around new business liaison. So if you are a new or growing business, that you have a city person that will help you through that process. And we need to make sure that City Hall is not just opened to opportunities, but that we're bringing in our business owners, that we're bringing in those that want to explore new opportunities into quote-unquote City Hall to get it done. And our business owners of color in particular, who have often been left out of those rooms, left out of those conversations, disconnected from these opportunities. Remember, I've got my $100 million and my $50 million. We are investing in these opportunities because there is, and for any entrepreneur, I'm a small business owner myself, a crisis always presents an opportunity. And as difficult as these last 20 months have been, let's look for the opportunity. Those dollars present a significant opportunity, and with the support of the city and an economic development force that is interested in and invested in building this business, we can actually make this happen. And it has to be with not just the equity lens that we should all be wearing, but with certain intentionality with those investments and building those relationships and creating those opportunities.
Thank you.
Across our city too, and I think Michelle said, I think it's something very important that she says, is that when we do this work with our business owners of color, that we aren't simply focused on our Black community, that we're not just focused on Dorchester, Roxbury, Mattapan, that we're exploring every opportunity in every neighborhood of our city.
Great.
Thank you. Before we go to the next few questions we have from some of our online viewers, I want to open it up very quickly. Is there anyone sitting with us right now who may have a question for our candidate? Microphone's coming right to you. Okay, we have this young lady here.
Yep. I'll just take this off. Maybe that's the problem. Good evening, Counselor. My question is, as a current City of Boston employee, former union president, we tend to deal with a lot, and I can say this specifically for the local that I was the president of. I was the president of Local 445, which is the Public Works Department, the shuttle, the street lighting, the bridge operators. We have noticed that the Public Works Department is very top-heavy, meaning the higher-ups are making some good bread, and the poor people who plow the streets, do the trash, fill the potholes, make pennies. Most of the unions make pennies on the dollar. And, we were offered a raise of 1.5. What is 0% when you have to live in the city of Boston for 10 years? I feel as though, monies that higher-ups have, it's not trickling down to the little people. And the little people need a couple more dollars.
Yep.
They need some money. And we have had conversations, you and I personally have had conversations when I was the president, about different things that are going on. And it's great to have all these extra people backing you, but I think it's awesome that you have the actual people who you will be our boss backing you. You will be our boss. Like, I'm a constituent, I live here, but you will be my boss. And the fact that you, as my boss, feels like you have potential to help, whether I'm making 100,000 or I'm making 20,000. I got to give you credit for that. I got to give you credit for that. But we do need a little more money.
Yeah. No, thank you, Rainice, for the question. And it's a little overwhelming, a little bit, to think about the 18,000 or so employees that will report to me as their boss. But really, when I think about the city worker, when I think about the men and women who go out every day and do the hard work, I'm grateful because, you know, it might be my name on the ballot. It will be eventually my name on the letterhead, hopefully in the next 2 weeks. But it is you and the men and women who go out to work every single day that truly represent this city. And when I think about the lack of pay parity, when I think about the lack of opportunity, when I think about the cost of living in this city, and I want you to all live in this city, we've got a lot of work to do to correct that. And I haven't had the opportunity as a city councilor to engage in negotiations. I look forward to engaging in negotiations with the men and women who work for the city, who will work with me leading the city, and making sure that they are treated with the respect and the dignity that they deserve for the work that they do. We also have to do, and this is, you know, I'm happy, and maybe it's because I'm a teacher or maybe because I'm a mother of teenagers, happy to give credit where it's due. Andrea, in the course of the preliminary campaign, talked about going department to department and doing an audit. And that is around, you know, making sure that we have the right people doing the right work, that we have the right amount of people in certain positions and other positions. And that's also around diversity, making sure that our city's departments are a reflection of our city. And I'm, you know, imitation is a great form of flattery, and I'm going to take that on as mayor of the city, because I think it's really important that we do that, so that we are, you know, doing all those pieces for the 18,000 men and women who run this city every single day.
Thank you. You have another question?
Thank you. Good evening, Council.
Good evening.
So thank you, Ms. Salters, for raising the issue of the pay disparities that take place in the city. As Renise mentioned, there's also a need to look at it from a racial equity lens. I work for the city. I've been working for the city off and on since 1999. And have personally experienced where you have employees of color who do the same work, same job title, and there is a drastic disparity in the pay. So when looking at that special commission, also take a deep look at the racial inequities that take place in the pay scales of city employees. This multi-part question. You mentioned the situation in Mass and Cass. You mentioned public health, you mentioned mental health, which I commend you on. I saw you at a candidates forum in Nubian Square, and you were the only candidate there that even mentioned mental health. No one else looked at the situation from that perspective. I would like for you to consider the public works perspective. That area is riddled with trash. You have rodents, even the bicycles. I made note, because I'm around the city, made note. All the rental bikes that are supposedly there to help Boston be an active city, well, they're an eyesore. They're heaped up, piled up in trash, past Newmarket Square, going down towards South Boston, all back there. So the public works part of that crisis is real. We need people out there cleaning that area now. This stuff, well.
They come through with the street sweeper every day.
Okay.
As soon as they come through, literally, as soon as they come through, it's a mess again.
Okay, so they need to get out the
We
street
need a different
sweepers
solution.
and be on foot, because there are areas
Yep.
that's causing a major eyesore and an increase in rodents in the city. So I thank you for that. The situation with the Long Island shelter, which was formerly Long Island Shelter, once that bridge is rebuilt, will there be a treatment facility, or was that land sold for private development? Because that has been the plan that has been discussed since they shut it down years ago. So this is the first time, not that I'm all hearing, but that I've heard that there was actually a plan last I heard, there was a plan to move the residents that were experiencing homelessness over onto a campus in Franklin Park. And as a resident of this area, I feel we have enough, shelters and things in our neighborhood. So,
Long Island is a long-term care facility. It is not for private development. There is Camp Harborview on part of the island. That's a summer program
Okay.
For young people. The rest of the island is for long-term recovery. And that is my commitment to the people of Boston. There will not be private development on that island. It is for the people of Boston. It is certainly for the people not from Boston to find recovery, long-term recovery. It is about detox, recovery, mental health, workforce development, efforts around family reunification, and returning to community. The Shattuck needs to be part of the solution as well for longer-term treatment. There are some long-term efforts happening around the Shattuck that the state's focused on, both on some redevelopment around housing and supportive housing and affordable housing, as well as some continued efforts around recovery programs.
Okay, so as a resident, I'm just going on record, Shattuck should be off limits. I mean, we have enough in that area. That is a place where we go for our families, outing, walking, exercise. We already have 2 shelters there already.
So those shelters will go.
They will go.
This is longer-term supportive housing.
Okay. You got all that space down the Seaport. That cannot exclusively be for high-end living. As a resident, I'm just going on record, but I will pass the mic. But I do thank you for your time and being here at 9:30, 10 o'clock on a weeknight. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we got our middle school teacher.
Okay. I think I have the question formulated in the way I want to.
Perfect.
Forgive me if I don't. So I am a middle school teacher. A number of my kids are suffering from homelessness, one, due to the pandemic, two, due to other reasons, and I think I have a few questions. One, do you believe that housing conditions are learning conditions? Two, housing justice is something that we've been trying to negotiate with, it's our collective bargaining time, with BPS to add to our teacher contract. They've made it clear that they don't think that housing justice belongs in a teacher contract. Will you be able to support us in helping us fight for our students? And 3, what can we do to end home base? A number of our kids have been displaced. We know that consistency is the best thing for our students, and many of our students have to now move schools due to transportation because of the home base that BPS has in place.
Great, great series of questions, and I appreciate your thoughtfulness in that question, how you've really centered our students, your kids, your classroom kids in that. I have on the city council since I joined in 2016. The conversation around family homelessness, especially how it impacts our young people, is what I brought to the council. We as a city did not talk about family homelessness until I arrived, and I'm grateful, early in my term as a counselor in 2016 was invited to be a part of the Family-Led Stability Project, which worked with so first for everybody, every Boston public school has students experiencing homelessness. There are certainly higher concentration levels in some of our schools. So this pilot worked with 7 schools to create, in addition to the family liaison that was focused on students who are vulnerable and experiencing homelessness and housing instability, similar to sort of the same challenge, that we were also putting in a housing search specialist into each of those schools, and that we were also looking to create opportunities for housing close to school, because consistency is critical. Something else that I discovered early in my time on the council is when students became homeless or were moving from one shelter location to another shelter location or temporary housing location to another, that transportation sometimes took 2 weeks to catch up. We've been able to really shorten that since I joined the council Most cases we're down to 3 and 4 days of a period of transition. Still too long. As a former classroom teacher, the classroom is where our kids need to be. We know, and because I've worked on it, support services are in place in our school buildings to help kids. We don't always have enough support services, but they are there. And that consistency, that the companionship, the social networks, and having the adults around you that you've grown, built relationship with is really important. And we've just expanded that pilot to, I forget if it's, thank you, if it's 22 schools or 28 schools for this current school year. COVID has put some things in flux. The home-based question. So because of McKinney-Vento rules, if a student becomes homeless, we are mandated to transport, and I support this because consistency is key, that we are transporting kids from wherever they are sheltered or living unstable. So if a family is doubled up, a child is considered homeless, that they are transported to school, and that transportation needs to find them and bring them. Over the long time, though, over a longer period of time, if students are rehoused stably, and I put that in air quotes because housing can be terribly unstable for a long time, that children should go to school close as in part of their community and to build some of those networks. So it is certainly case by case. My preference is that students stay in the school community that they know. That certainly is the case while they're experiencing housing instability. For the long term, a permanent placement is best. The housing piece through the BTU's contract for teachers or for kids? For teachers, okay. So, okay, so I appreciate that. As a former teacher, I think that is important work. I do think, and this goes back to Rainissa's question around city workers, when we think about my desire, and I think the general desire to create more home ownership opportunities in our city and look at opportunities to utilize down payment assistance and other supports, that our priority, and my priority as the boss, should be for the city's workers. And we think about especially the disparity around pay across lots of different bargaining units that, people that work for the city, that we've got to look to create those opportunities, both for rental workforce housing, but city workforce housing, and ownership opportunities. I will be very honest with you and direct with you. I don't know if the contract is the best place to have that negotiated. I will commit to you over the next couple of weeks, because I'm looking forward to negotiating the teacher's contract. I will look at that more closely and understand it. Thanks. Thank you for that question. And thank you for your service to our kids. What school are you at? We're both at Abacati. Very good. Excellent. My sister Sarah is doing, I think, some clinical hours there for, Sarah?
Good evening.
Good evening.
Councilor George. My name is Louis Elisa. I have a question. I want to have a real question, and I have one goes back to the housing. You do know that the governor wants to sell the Shattuck Hospital to a private developer. And so your commitment about Long Island, does that also pertain to the Shattuck Hospital?
The Shattuck is state, as you know, Long Island is city.
Well, but the city has to agree to the housing plan, and the goal is, because it was part of the city of Boston until 1954, that we should and can reclaim that, along with the parts of Franklin Park, like the zoo along Seaver Street, which has been abandoned for 50 years. So we're in negotiations for part of that with the $28 million that came out of the deal. So I'm hopeful that you can focus on not selling public parkland to a private developer as one of your goals. So my question is, because
my commitment is to not sell public park land to private entities.
So we won't be supporting the governor's idea for Shattuck Hospital.
I'm going to have to look at specifically that component of it, because I don't know if I'm fully understanding.
Well, that was the deal. I'm working on the CAB.
Perfect.
I know that's the challenge that's coming from the various groups and organizations that oppose the project, because there is an alternative to Franklin Park, which is the Arborway and other activities that can take place.
I think we should be looking at both.
Okay, so my question is, you've committed $100 million, and that sounds like a big number for people who don't work in development. The city of Boston, over the last 30 years, spent $20 billion to develop the South Boston waterfront and all that you see down there. Having worked with the governor and the president and everybody else over these years, $20 billion. What do you believe can get accomplished in all of Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan with $100 million, and where would that be directed?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it's not for all of Dorchester, Roxbury, and Mattapan. I want to see those dollars, those $100 million from the federal funds, be invested in ways that the community wants to see them invested, whether it's through some additional down payment assistance, whether it's through some small business supports and small business development supports, whether it's in some opportunities to support community-based organizations and some capital improvements. That's the way I'd like to see that. And those investments, that $100 million really should be an initial starting point. And as we look where we're investing those dollars, that it's done sustainably. It's done in a way that's going to create and generate more dollars down the road. So that's where I'd see that. But you are right, $100 million is this much in the big pie of all the money. But we've got to start somewhere. And I think that we can make some significant, sustainable investments with those dollars. But it's not my money to decide exactly how it gets spent. I do want to bring together this working group to set some priorities with those dollars. So it's not out of the city's budget. This is from the federal funds that are coming in, and it's specific to the Black community.
You know the state has $100 billion. That the $550 million that has been given to Boston is only a portion of what should have come in, and that you know that all the communities in Boston, the Black community has received the less support and assistance.
Yes.
So $100 million would only get us to margin because all of the businesses around here, only 50% of our businesses at this point are able now to begin to reopen.
Yes.
They're all behind. Mr. Singleton and others can tell you, we have been hurting. So $100 million would be literally a drop in the economic budget just for Grove Hall. But the question I'm asking, is there a particular agency, how will $100 million fit into the $550 million, which the city has received under the COVID, and then the other, I hope it's about $1 billion that's coming in for.
I do too.
But $1 billion.
So this is a portion of all of that federal money being designated specifically to the Black community. Doesn't mean that the other dollars aren't also impacting the Black community. The other $50 million in particular around small business supports. This is a very specific amount of money with very specific intentions for a particular community. It is, yes, a piece of what I hope is $1 billion from all of those federal resources. That money will be decided by the community on how it's spent, with some parameters from me as mayor.
Thank you. One last question, audience, or shall I go to the text? Going once, going twice? Okay.
And I'll leave my card for everyone in the audience, anyone that wants to follow up with additional questions.
All right. So, there's another population in the city of Boston that experiences great homelessness as well as unemployment. And often at times they are labeled as at-risk youth. So these are youth between the ages, now it's actually decreased from, let's say, 14 years old all the way up to 32. Many of them with criminal records, many of them high school dropouts. Many times they have gone to prison, they've served their time, they come back and they find themselves homeless because they have stay-away orders, because they lived in a housing development, but their mother lives there, their father lives there, their children live there. The same urgency, the question is, the same urgency that will be aimed at making sure there is treatment, housing, educational assistance, and job assistance for those who are suffering from the opioid epidemic, if you will that same urgency also apply to these young black and brown citizens who have been overlooked for hundreds of years?
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question. And, you know, the urgency in which we need to act, you know, we think about that generation, that whole group of individuals who are going to lose out on so many different opportunities. And there's a couple of things at play there. One, you know, the work around preventing engagement in activities that put a young person at risk is critical. And for me, when I think about my responsibility as mayor of this city, it's working with some of the city agencies, when we think about our BCYF, our youth centers, but really empowering the organizations that are doing the work already, that are doing really good work in our neighborhoods. Again, don't believe in recreating the wheel. I think city's job should be supporting organizations who are doing good things. So I'd like to focus on that. As it relates to returning citizens, so anyone experiencing incarceration, we as a city need to truly invest in our office of returning citizens. We need to make sure that it's not located somewhere where it's hard to access. We also need to make sure that it has a staff that can do this work, and it is under resourced, under capacity, and needs additional resources. And over the course of the campaign, I was really grateful to have met so many people who really want to inform some change as it relates to our returning citizens. And that work shouldn't start your first day out. It's got to start your first day in, because our city's residents will return home. So making sure that they have sort of the technical things they need around driver's licenses and IDs and things like that, that's critically important. That we are working with our state partners around CORE reform, that we are partnering with. We have an opportunity, especially as the city, to work with our housing authority to make sure that individuals can return home and to community. And while incarcerated, strengthening both family bonds and relationships and working to repair any damage that's been done, and also working on workforce development opportunities so that when an individual returns to community, returns home, that they have resources in place. You know, I've heard, and it was only through these conversations that I realized, you know, that individuals are paying to be on parole, paying to be on probation with their fees. I mean, how is that setting up an individual for success when their first day out, we're sending them a bill? And we have to work with all of our corrections facilities, both county and state and federal, to not send people to our shelters. We've got to do the work that creates opportunities for them to re-engage in community and in networks and with social bonds and with employment and housing.
Thank you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank everyone who was online for tuning in to hear from our two mayoral candidates. I want to thank you all for being here. And I definitely want to thank you for staying until 10:30.
I hope the kids are in bed by the time I get home.
So we really appreciate you being here. I know that I will say for my brothers and sisters associated with the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, we are humbled and we thank you for coming. This is very important to us in regards to who our next mayor will be. And so I'm sure everyone is happy that you came to share some thoughts with us.
I hope everyone will consider me for a vote on Tuesday or go tomorrow for the last day of early voting. I'm not leaving. I do have my cards with cell phones. I'm here to hang out for a little bit.
All right. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.